It was now 2 days before the Passover and the festival of unleavened bread. The chief priests and the teachers of the law of Moses were planning how they could secretly have Jesus arrested and killed. They were saying, we must not do it during the festival because the people will riot. Jesus was eating in Bethany at the home of Simon, who once had leprosy, when a woman came in with a very expensive bottle of sweet-smelling perfume. After breaking the bottle open, she poured the perfume on Jesus' head. This made some of the guests angry, and they complained, "Why such a waste? We could have sold this perfume for more than 300 silver coins and given the money to the poor." So they started saying cruel things about the woman. But Jesus said, "Leave her alone. Why are you bothering her? She has done a beautiful thing for me. The poor will be part of you always, and whenever you want to, you can give to them. But you won't always have me here with you. She has done all she could by pouring perfume on my body to prepare it for burial. You may be sure that wherever the good news is told over all the world, people will remember what she has done, and they will tell others." Judas Iscariot was one of the 12 disciples. He went to the chief priests and offered to help them arrest Jesus. They were glad to hear this, and they promised to pay him, so Judas started looking for a chance to betray Jesus. It was the first day of the festival of unleavened bread, and the Passover lambs were being killed. Jesus' disciples asked him, "Where do you want us to prepare the Passover meal?" Jesus said to two of the disciples, "Go into the city where you will meet a man carrying a jug of water. Follow him. And when he goes into a house, say to the owner of that house, 'Our teacher wants to know if you have a room where he can eat the Passover meal with his followers.' The owner will take you upstairs and show you a large room, furnished and ready for you to use. Prepare the meal there," Jesus said. The two disciples went into the city and found everything just as Jesus had told them, so they prepared the Passover meal. While Jesus and the 12 disciples were eating together that evening, he said, "The one who is going to betray me is now eating with me." This made the disciples sad, and one after another they said to Jesus, "Surely you don't mean me." He answered, "It is one of you 12, who is eating from this dish with me. The Son of Man will die, just as the scriptures say, but it is going to be terrible for the one who betrays me. That one would be better off if he had never been born." During the meal, Jesus took bread and broke some of it in his hands. He blessed the bread and said, "This is my body. Take and eat." Jesus picked up a cup of wine and he gave thanks to God. He gave it to his disciples and they all drank some. Then he said, "This is my blood, which is poured out for many people. And with it, God makes a new covenant. From now on, I'm not going to drink any wine until I drink new wine in God's kingdom." Then they sang a hymn and went out to the Mount of Olives. Jesus said to all of his disciples, "All of you will reject me. As the scriptures say, I will strike down the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered. But after I am raised to life, I will go ahead of you to Galilee." Peter spoke up. Even if everybody else rejects you, I will never reject you. Jesus replied, this very night, before a rooster crows twice, you will deny me 3 times. But Peter was so sure of himself that he said, even if I have to die with you, I will not betray you. All of them said the same thing. Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane, and he told them, sit here while I pray. Jesus took along with him Peter and James and John, and he told them, sit here while I pray. I am so sad that I feel as if I'm dying. Stay here and keep awake with me. And then Jesus walked on a little further. Then he knelt down on the ground and he prayed, Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Don't make me suffer by having me drink this cup. But your will be done, not mine. And then Jesus returned to the disciples and he found them sleeping. And he said to Simon Peter, are you asleep? Can't you even stay awake 1 hour? Stay awake and pray that you won't be tested. You want to do what is right, but your will is weak. And Jesus then went back to pray again, and he said the same prayer. And then he returned to the disciples again, and he found them sleeping. They simply could not stay awake. And he went and prayed again and returned to the disciples and found them sleeping a 3rd time. He said, enough of your sleeping and resting. The time has come for the Son of Man to be handed over to sinners. Get up, let's go. The one who betrayed me is already here. Jesus was still speaking when Judas, the betrayer, came up. He was one of the 12 disciples, and a mob of angry men with swords and clubs were all around him. They'd been sent by the chief priests and the nation's leaders and the teachers of the law of Moses. Judas had set up a signal with them ahead of time. The one whom I greet with a kiss is the one you want. So Judas walked right up to Jesus and kissed him. Then the men grabbed Jesus and arrested him. One of them pulled out a sword and struck off the ear of the high priest's slave. Jesus said, why do you come with swords and clubs as if I were a criminal? Day after day, I was with you in the temple. You could have arrested me then. What the scriptures say will come true. And then all of Jesus' disciples ran away and deserted him. Jesus was then led off to the high priest. Then the chief priests, the nation's leaders, the teachers of the law of Moses all met together again. Peter, he'd followed at a distance. He was waiting in the courtyard of the priest's house. He sat down with the guards to warm himself by the fire. The chief priests and the whole council tried to find someone who would accuse Jesus of a crime so that they could put him to death. But they could not find anyone to accuse him. Many people did tell lies against Jesus, but they couldn't agree amongst themselves what to say. Finally, some others stood up and they lied about Jesus. They said, we heard him say that in 3 days he would tear down this temple and build it up again all by himself. But even those couldn't agree on what lies to say. The high priest stood up in the council and asked Jesus, "Why don't you say anything in your own defense? Don't you hear the charges that they're making against you?" But Jesus kept quiet, didn't say a word. The high priest asked him another question. "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the most glorious God?" "I am. Soon you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of God, all-powerful, and coming with the clouds of heaven." And at once the high priest ripped off his clothes and he shouted, "Why do we need more witnesses? You heard him claim to be God. What's your decision?" They all agreed then that he should be put to death. Some of the people started spitting on Jesus. They blindfolded him, they hit him with their fists, and they said, "Tell us who hit you." The guards then took charge of him, and they beat him and mocked him. While Peter was still over in the courtyard, a servant girl of the high priest came up, and she saw Peter warming himself by the fire. She stared at him and said, "You were with that Jesus of Nazareth." Peter replied, "That isn't true. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't have any idea what you mean." Then he went out to the gate, and a rooster crowed. The servant girl saw Peter again and said to the people standing there, "This man was one of them." "No, I'm not," Peter said. A little while later, another person saw Peter. "You're certainly one of them. You have a Galilean accent." This time, Peter began to curse and swear, "I don't even know the guy that you're talking about." And at once, a rooster crowed a second time. Peter remembered what Jesus had said about him. "Before a rooster crows twice, you will deny 3 times that you even know me." So Peter started crying. Early the next morning, the chief priests, the nation's leaders, the teachers of the law of Moses met together yet again with the whole Jewish council. They tied up Jesus and led him off to Pilate. Pilate asked Jesus, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And Jesus answered, "Those are your words." The chief priests brought many charges against Jesus. Then Pilate questioned him again, "Don't you have anything to say for yourself?" But Jesus did not answer, and Pilate was amazed. During Passover, Pilate always freed one prisoner chosen by the people. And at that time, there was a prisoner named Barabbas. He and some others had been arrested for murder during an insurrection. The crowd now came and asked Pilate to set a prisoner free, just as he usually did. Pilate asked them, "Do you want me to free for you the King of the Jews?" Pilate knew that the chief priests had brought Jesus to him because they were jealous. But the chief priests told the crowd to ask for Barabbas rather than Jesus. Pilate asked the crowd, "What do you want me to do with this one that you call the King of the Jews?" They yelled, "Execute him on a cross!" Pilate asked, "What crime has he done?" They just yelled, "Execute him on a cross!" Pilate wanted to please the crowd, so he set Barabbas free. Then he ordered his soldiers to beat Jesus with a whip and nail him to a cross. The soldiers led Jesus inside the courtyard of the fortress and called together the rest of the troops. They put a purple robe on him, and on his head they placed a crown that they'd made out of thorn branches. And they made fun of Jesus, shouting, "Hey, you King of the Jews!" Then they beat him on the head with a stick, and they spit on him and knelt down and pretended to worship him. Then when the soldiers had finished making fun of Jesus, they took off the purple robe, they put his own clothes back on him, and they led him off to be nailed to a cross. Simon from Cyrene happened to be coming out from the country, and they forced him to carry Jesus' cross. Simon was the father of Alexander and Rufus. The soldiers took Jesus to Golgotha, which means place of the skull. There they gave him some wine mixed with a drug to ease the pain, but he didn't even drink it. They nailed Jesus to a cross and gambled to see who would get his clothes. It was about 9 o'clock in the morning when they nailed him to a cross. On it was a sign that said why he had been nailed there. It said, "The King of the Jews." The soldiers also nailed two criminals on crosses, one to the right of Jesus and the other to his left. People who passed by said terrible things about Jesus. They shook their heads and they shouted, "Ha, ha, ha! So you're the one who claims that you could tear down the temple and build it up in 3 days all by yourself." Save yourself. Come down from the cross. The chief priests and the teachers of the law of Moses also made fun of him. They said to each other, "He saved others, but he can't even save himself. If he's the Messiah, the King of Israel, let him come down from the cross. Then we will see and believe." And the two criminals, one on his left and one on his right, they joined in mocking Jesus. About noon, the sky turned dark, stayed that way until 3 o'clock in the afternoon. About that time, Jesus shouted, "Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you deserted me?" Some of the people standing there heard Jesus, and they said, "He's calling for Elijah." One of them ran and grabbed a sponge. They soaked it in wine and put it on a stick to nourish him. They said, "Let's wait and see if Elijah will come and take him down from the cross." Jesus then shouted and died. At once the curtain in the temple tore in two from top to bottom. Roman army officer was standing in front of Jesus. When the officer saw how Jesus died, he said, "This man really was Son of God." Some women were looking on from a distance. They had come with Jesus from Jerusalem or to Jerusalem, but even before they had been his followers, and they'd helped him while he was in Galilee. Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James the Younger, and Joseph were two of these women. Salome was also one of them. It was now evening before the Sabbath, and the Jewish people were getting ready for that holy day. A man named Joseph from Arimathea was brave enough to ask Pilate for the lifeless body of Jesus. Joseph was a highly respected member of the Jewish council, and he was also waiting for God's kingdom to come. Pilate was surprised to hear that Jesus had died so quickly, and he called to the army officer to find out if Jesus had been dead very long. After the officer affirmed it, Pilate then let Joseph have the body of Jesus. Joseph bought a linen cloth and took the body down from the cross. Then he had it wrapped in the cloth, and he put it in a tomb that had been cut into solid rock. Then he rolled a big stone against the entrance to the tomb. The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God.